Locals spot a polar bear asking for help. When he sees why, he turns pale. It was a cold, clear morning in the Arctic, and the vast icy water stretched out under an endless sky. The air was crisp, the kind that stings your cheeks and fills your lungs with a biting chill. Out there in a place where few dared to venture, Mark guided his small, weather-worn fishing boat over the glassy waves. He was alone, surrounded only by the vastness of the sea and the quiet hum of the motor, cutting through the stillness of the morning. Mark had spent his whole life in these frigid waters. To him, the Arctic wasn't just a wilderness. It was his home, a place he knew deeply and respected fiercely. As he made his way across the waves, he looked out over the horizon, his eyes scanning the landscape, trained to catch every small detail. To him, today felt like any other. Just another early morning, tending to his fishing traps, braving the cold to make a living from these harsh waters. But then something unusual caught his eye. Far off in the distance, near the edge of a drifting sheet of ice, he noticed a large, pale figure moving in a slow, almost labored way. Mark squinted, adjusting his gaze as he steered his boat in that direction, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. As he grew closer, he realized it was a polar bear, a massive one, its white coat nearly blending into the icy background. Welcome back to PlotTwister. Before we unravel today's mystery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you're always in the loop. Mark had seen polar bears before. They were powerful creatures, confident and agile, built to survive in the harshest of environments. But this bear, something was different. It wasn't moving with the grace and strength he was used to. Its steps seemed heavy, each movement strained, like it was carrying a weight he couldn't yet see. A wave of curiosity and something more, a sense of unease, stirred within him. He pushed his boat closer, eyes fixed on the bear's awkward movements. As he closed the distance, the bear's gaze shifted toward him, and for a brief moment their eyes met across the water. Mark's heart skipped. In that gaze, he sensed something unexpected. A silent plea, a strange kind of desperation. Mark's heart was pounding as he drew closer to the bear, his grip tightening on the edge of his boat. He knew full well the risks of getting near such a powerful creature. Polar bears were the kings of the Arctic, apex predators that didn't fear anything or anyone. But this bear wasn't acting like the fierce animals he was used to. It was roaring, it was pacing, and it didn't even seem to care about his presence. Instead, it looked right at him with eyes that held a strange, unsettling calm. Slowly, Mark eased his boat even closer, keeping his movements smooth and steady, not wanting to startle the animal. Every instinct in him told him to stay cautious, but there was something about the bear's stillness, its heavy, tired gaze that drew him in. He felt an urge to understand what was happening, to make sense of the bear's unusual behavior. The closer he got, the more details he could see. The bear's white fur was matted in places, clumped together as if something had been pressed against it. Its paws, normally strong and sure, seemed hesitant, almost as if they were dragging against an unseen weight. Mark's pulse quickened as he noticed the faint shadows of something dark entangled around the bear's body, barely visible above the water's surface. The bear let out a low, soft sound, almost like a groan, and shifted its weight, struggling against whatever was holding it back. Mark felt a jolt of realization. The bear was in trouble, bound by something that he couldn't yet fully see. He could feel the tension rising, his body tense as he watched the bear's every move, half expecting it to lunge or panic. But it didn't. It simply waited, its eyes fixed on him with an eerie, quiet trust. For a moment, Mark felt the world narrow around him. It was just him, the boat, and this massive, struggling creature. His own breath felt loud in the silence, each exhale visible in the cold air. The bear let out another soft sound, almost pleading, and Mark's heart sank. He knew somehow that this was no ordinary encounter. The bear needed him. Mark took a deep breath, steadying himself as he moved even closer, peering over the side of his boat to get a clearer view. His heart was pounding, his eyes focused intently on the bear. The closer he looked, the clearer it became. Something was wrapped around the animal, something dark and tangled that pressed tightly against its body. The bear's thick fur didn't hide it entirely. Strands of what looked like rope and bits of netting were visible, cutting into its skin and fur. He could see the bear's muscles straining each time it shifted, as if every movement was a struggle against this invisible snare. The ropes and netting dug deep, pressing harshly against the animal's limbs and chest, binding it in a way that must have been unbearably painful. The bear was caught, trapped in a mess of debris, something left behind, and now threatening to end its life. Mark's mouth went dry as he watched the bear's feeble attempts to move. It lifted a paw only to have it pulled back by the weight of the tangled mess. There were cuts visible along its legs, places where the ropes had rubbed the skin raw. He could tell it had been struggling for a long time, and each attempt to free itself had only made things worse. The bear let out another sound, a low, almost mournful groan, and Mark felt a wave of sympathy that took him by surprise. He'd always respected these creatures from a distance, but now up close he could see its suffering, its vulnerability. It was the fierce, untouchable predator he had always imagined. It was hurt, bound, and helpless. Mark swallowed, his eyes tracing the tangled web of ropes and nets as he took in the full extent of the bear's entrapment. The realization settled heavily on him. This animal was bound by something humans had left behind. It was an unintended trap, yet no less cruel. He felt a sense of responsibility pressing on him, the weight of the bear's gaze locked on him, silent but pleading. The bear couldn't free itself, and the more Mark looked, the more he understood just how dire its situation had become. Mark steadied himself on the edge of the boat, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his long pole. The cold metal was slick in his grip, and he could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. Carefully, he extended the pole toward the bear, aiming to hook one of the ropes wrapped around its chest. The bear watched him intently, its eyes steady, but filled with a strange, quiet desperation. It was as if the animal understood that he was there to help, choosing to stay calm despite the danger. He nudged the pole against the first strand of rope, wedging the hook between it and the bear's fur. With a careful, steady pull, he began to tug at it, each movement cautious and deliberate. The rope was tougher than he had expected, damp and tangled, resisting his efforts as he worked to free even the smallest section. The cold wind bit at his face, and every muscle in his body tensed as he struggled with the tangled mess. The bear shifted slightly, adjusting to the pressure, and Mark felt a sudden jolt as the boat rocked. His heart leaped, the fear rising up for a moment, but he kept his focus steady, his movements controlled. He managed to cut through the first section of rope, freeing a small part of the bear's chest. The bear let out a soft, low sound, almost like a sigh of relief, and Mark's own tension eased just a fraction. Piece by piece, he worked his way around the bear's body, each cut bringing a little more freedom to the struggling animal. But it wasn't easy. The bear's movements, though slight, sent shivers through the boat, and more than once. Mark nearly lost his balance. The cold was seeping into his hands, numbing his fingers, but he pushed through, driven by the look in the bear's eyes. Finally, he reached the thickest part of the tangle, a mess of knots that seemed to pull tight with every attempt to loosen it. Gritting his teeth, he leaned in, working with every ounce of strength he had left. Then, with one last determined tug, the final rope snapped free, falling into the icy water below. Mark stepped back, watching as the bear took its first free breath, its massive chest heaving as it slowly lifted its head, finally free from the crushing weight that had bound it. Mark stood frozen for a moment, watching the bear as it took in its newfound freedom. The ropes and netting that had held it captive now floated beside the boat, remnants of a silent struggle that had left marks on the animal's thick white fur. Shallow cuts and patches of raw skin were visible where the ropes had dug in, reminders of how long it had fought to escape. The bear lifted its head, breathing heavily, but it didn't move away. Instead, it turned to look at Mark, holding his gaze in a moment that felt almost sacred. In those dark, intelligent eyes, Mark saw a depth he couldn't explain, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and perhaps even understanding. It was as if the bear recognized him not as a threat, but as something different, someone who had helped when it had no one else. As the bear slowly began to move, Mark noticed the full extent of the damage. He could see deep impressions in its fur and skin, places where the ropes had nearly cut through, leaving raw, angry welts. He swallowed, the weight of it settling heavily on him. It wasn't just a random accident. The ropes, the bits of netting, they were remnants of fishing gear, discarded and forgotten, left to drill in the ocean where they became silent traps. Mark's stomach turned as he realized this mess had likely come from equipment just like his own. The bear took a few shaky steps, then paused, turning back to look at him one last time. For a brief, powerful moment, they held each other's gaze. Mark felt something shift within him, a deep sense of responsibility he hadn't anticipated. He'd come out here to fish, to earn his living, but in freeing this bear, he saw the unintended harm his world had brought into the lives of these creatures. With a final glance, the bear turned and slipped quietly into the water, swimming slowly but steadily away. Mark watched until it disappeared, leaving ripples on the surface of the icy sea. He stayed there in his boat, alone with his thoughts, a sense of awe mixed with a newfound awareness. This encounter had changed him, leaving him with a quiet resolve. As he started his journey back, he knew he'd carry this memory with him, a reminder of the fragile balance between the world he lived in and the world he had just saved. What are your thoughts on the twist we uncovered today? Comment your ideas below. Make sure to like and subscribe for a daily dose of drama and mystery. See you later with another twist.